They say freezing to death is like falling asleep, but the moment I touched him, I didn't freeze. I burned, and when I looked down, I wasn't just holding a lost puppy, I was holding the only weakness of the Alpha King, Raiden Patel. And now, he's coming for both of us. The snow had always been my companion. Cold, indifferent, predictable. I knew its moods better than I knew my own heartbeat. But kneeling there in the drift, my fingers burning from the ice as I clawed through the frozen powder, I felt something shift in the air around me. Something ancient and inevitable. The bundle was small, impossibly small, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined the whimper. Just my mind playing tricks after too many weeks of solitude. But then I saw the fur, dark as midnight, dusted with frost that sparkled like shattered diamonds in the pale light filtering through the pines. A wolf pup. My breath caught. Wolf pups didn't survive out here alone. They didn't wander from their packs, and they certainly didn't end up half buried in snowdrifts on the edge of the northern wastes, where even the trees grew twisted and bitter from the cold. I should have left it. Every instinct I'd honed over 3 years of isolation screamed at me to walk away, to return to my cabin and bolt the door and pretend I'd never heard that sound. The wolves of the north weren't like the stories children heard in the southern villages. They weren't noble or kind. They were territorial, ruthless, and they didn't forgive trespassers. But the pup whimpered again. A sound so small and broken it shattered something in my chest. "All right," I whispered, more to myself than the dying creature. "All right, I've got you." I dug faster, my fingers screaming in protest as the cold bit deeper. The pup was heavier than I expected, its body limp and unresponsive as I finally freed it from its frozen grave. Ice had crystallized in its fur, turning the soft black coat into something brittle and sharp. Its eyes were closed, tiny breaths barely visible in the frigid air. Without thinking, I yanked open my coat and pulled the pup against my chest, tucking it beneath the layers of wool and fur. Skin to skin. The healers in the villages used to say body heat was the fastest way to save someone from the cold. I'd never tried it on a wolf before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The pup's fur was like touching death itself, so cold it felt wet, clinging to my skin with an unnatural heaviness. I wrapped my arms around the small body, curling over it as I started the trek back to my cabin. My legs burned from the effort of moving through the deep snow, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. "Just hold on," I murmured against the pup's frozen ear. "Just a little longer." That's when it happened. The pain started as a whisper, a strange tingling sensation that spread across my left shoulder blade like spilled water. I stumbled, nearly dropping the pup as the tingling sharpened into something more insistent, more urgent. Then it ignited. I screamed. The sound ripped from my throat, raw and primal, echoing through the silent forest. It felt like someone had pressed a brand directly to my skin, searing through flesh and muscle and bone. My knees hit the snow, and I barely managed to keep the pup cradled against me as I collapsed forward, gasping. The pain intensified. I could smell burning, not wood or fabric, but something deeper, something wrong. My vision blurred with tears as I clawed at my shoulder with one hand, the other still desperately clutching the pup. Through the fabric of my coat, through my shirt, I could feel something forming, spreading, a mark. I tore at my coat, yanking it down my arm with shaking fingers. The cold air hit my exposed skin, but I barely felt it. Because there, blazing against my pale flesh like a living flame, was a rune. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. Orange and gold, swirling in patterns that hurt to look at directly. pulsing with a light that had no business existing in the gray winter world. The lines were intricate, almost organic, like roots or veins or the branches of a tree caught in an eternal fire. And at its center, a symbol I'd never seen before, but somehow recognized in the deepest part of my soul. A crown, a storm, a promise written in ancient magic. "No," I breathed, but the word came out broken. "No, no, no." The pup stirred against my chest, and I looked down to see its eyes flutter open. They were gold. Not the amber of normal wolves, but true gold, molten and aware in a way that made my blood run cold despite the fire consuming my shoulder. The rune pulsed brighter, and the pain crested like a wave, dragging me under. I heard myself scream again, or maybe I didn't. Maybe the sound stayed trapped in my chest as the world tilted sideways. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the pup's golden eyes watching me with something that looked almost like recognition. I woke to thunder. At least, that's what my confused, pain-addled mind tried to tell me as consciousness dragged me back to the surface. But thunder didn't shake the ground in rhythmic patterns. Thunder didn't sound like dozens of somethings moving in perfect synchronization, getting closer with every heartbeat. My eyes snapped open to find myself on the floor of my cabin. I didn't remember getting here, didn't remember anything after the mark and the pain and those impossible golden eyes. The pup was curled against my stomach, breathing steadily now, its fur dry and soft. The mark on my shoulder blazed with residual heat, a constant reminder of what had just happened. What was still happening. Because the thunder wasn't thunder at all. It was paws. Massive paws hitting frozen ground, accompanied by the low rumble of growls that rattled my bones even through the cabin walls. I dragged myself to the window, every muscle protesting, and peered through the frosted glass. My heart stopped. They surrounded the cabin like a living wall. Wolves the size of horses, their eyes glowing in the twilight, their breath forming clouds of mist in the freezing air. Dozens of them, maybe more. And at the front, larger than all the rest, stood a wolf that could only be their leader. Its fur was the color of storm clouds, silver and gray and touched with black, and its eyes burned the same molten gold as the pup's, the same gold that now swirled in the mark, searing my skin. The Alpha King had found us, and he was not pleased. The door didn't just open. It exploded inward, torn from its hinges as if it were made of parchment instead of solid oak. Splinters rained across the floor, and I threw myself over the pup instinctively, shielding its small body with mine as the entire cabin shook from the impact. When I looked up, he was there. The shift happened so fast my mind struggled to process it. One moment, the massive silver wolf filled my doorway, its shoulders scraping the frame. The next, a man stood in its place, tall and broad, and radiating a fury so palpable it made the air itself feel dangerous. Raiden Patel, the Storm King. I'd never seen him before, but I knew. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew what he looked like from the whispered descriptions that traveled with merchants and refugees. Dark hair that fell past his shoulders, still wet-looking from the shift. Skin kissed by the sun despite the eternal winter, marked with scars that told stories of battles survived. Eyes that same impossible molten gold, fixed on me with an intensity that made my earlier pain feel like a caress. He was shirtless despite the cold, wearing only dark leather pants and boots, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled rage. And across his left shoulder blade, mirror to mine, I could see the edge of a rune identical to the one burning beneath my clothes. "Where did you get that, pup?" His voice was granite and glaciers, each word precisely measured. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. The command in his tone was absolute. I clutched the wolf pup tighter, feeling its small body tremble against mine. I found him, in the snow. He was dying. Liar. He moved forward, and several more wolves entered behind him, smaller than their king but still enormous, still deadly. They fanned out around the cabin's interior with military precision, blocking every exit. That pup doesn't leave the fortress grounds. He couldn't have wandered this far, which means someone took him. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I don't know anything about a fortress. I found him half frozen. Show me your shoulder. It wasn't a request. I pulled back, wrapping both arms around the pup, and that's when I felt it. The mark, pulsing hot against my skin, responding to his proximity like a living thing. The pain made me gasp. Raiden's eyes narrowed. Now. No. The word came out steadier than I expected. You burst into my home, destroy my door, accuse me of crimes I didn't commit, and now you want me to... He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides, moving with that inhuman speed that marked his kind. His hand shot out, fingers closing around my upper arm, and before I could protest, he yanked down the collar of my shirt, exposing my shoulder. The rune blazed to life. Orange and gold light filled the cabin, so bright I had to squeeze my eyes shut. But brighter than the light was the pain, not the searing agony from before, but something else. Something that felt like lightning and fire and 1,000 needles piercing through my chest, all at once. I heard Raiden curse, felt his grip release, and when I opened my eyes, he was halfway across the room. His own hand pressed to his shoulder, his expression twisted with something between shock and fury. "Blood magic," he snarled, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You used blood magic to forge a false bond. I don't know any magic." I was shaking now, from pain and fear, and the sheer impossibility of everything happening. I touched him to save him, and this thing appeared. I don't even know what it is. It's a mate mark. The words came out like an accusation. The mark of the Patel bloodline. It only appears when a member of the royal family finds their true mate, and it only burns when the bond is genuine. He stared at his own palm as if it had betrayed him, but that's impossible. I felt you. You're human, weak. There's no way. A low growl cut through his words. We both looked down at the pup, who had wriggled out of my arms and now stood between us. Tiny body rigid, baby teeth bared at the Storm King himself. The growl was comical, coming from something so small, like a kitten trying to intimidate a wolf. But there was nothing comical about the pup's stance or the way its golden eyes blazed with protective fury. Raiden went very still. "Kian!" The pup, Kian, growled louder, taking a step toward the king, placing himself more firmly between us. Something shifted in Raiden's expression. The rage drained away, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or recognition. He slowly lowered himself into a crouch, bringing his massive frame closer to the pup's level, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge. "You defend her." It wasn't a question. "The mark is real. You've already chosen her." Kian's growl softened, but didn't stop entirely. His small tail stayed rigid, his stance protective. Raiden was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between the pup and me. I could see him thinking, calculating, coming to conclusions I desperately wanted to argue against. Finally, he straightened, and the wolves flanking the walls stirred in response to their alpha's movement. "The rebels," he said quietly. "They took Kian 3 days ago. We've been tracking him across the territories, but the trail kept going cold. I thought..." He paused, jaw clenching. "I thought we'd lost him. So I saved him." Relief flooded through me, sweet and sudden. "Then you can take him home, and we can forget this ever. You're coming with us." The relief evaporated. "What? No. I did you a favor. I saved your—" I gestured at Kian, unsure of the relationship. "Whatever he is to you, I don't want any part of your world. You don't have a choice." Raiden moved toward me again, and this time I scrambled backward, my spine hitting the cabin wall. He stopped just out of reach, but his presence filled the space between us. "That mark means you're bonded to the Patel line. The rebels who took Kian know what they're looking for. They'll have scouts watching, and the moment they realize the heir bonded to a lone woman in the wastes, they'll come for you. I can take care of myself." His laugh was bitter. "Against trained assassins? Against blood mages who can track that mark like a beacon?" He gestured at my shoulder. "You're a target now. The only question is whether you die out here alone, or you come with me to the one place in the north where you might actually survive. That's not— Look at it." He pointed at the mark, his own shoulder pulsing with answering light. "Try to leave. Try to walk away from Kian right now and see how far you get before the bond tears you apart." I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I'd been alone for 3 years and survived just fine, that I didn't need his protection or his fortress or his impossible golden eyes watching my every move. But the mark was already aching, a dull throb that intensified every time I thought about distance, about separation. And Kian had padded over to lean against my leg, his small body warm and trusting in a way that made my throat tight. "I don't want this," I whispered. "Neither do I." Raiden's voice was flat, emotionless. "But we don't always get what we want. Pack your things. We leave in 10 minutes. He turned toward the door, his wolves moving to follow, but I found my voice one more time. "And if I refuse?" He looked back over his shoulder, and the expression on his face was colder than any winter storm. "Then I'll carry you. Either way, Avianna Lee, you're coming home." He'd used my name. I'd never told him my name. The Storm King knew exactly who I was, and somehow that terrified me more than anything else. I'd never ridden a horse before, let alone behind a man who looked like he'd rather throw me into a snowbank than share his mount. Raiden hadn't spoken since we left the ruins of my cabin, his silence as oppressive as the winter sky pressing down on us. The only sounds were the steady crunch of hooves through snow and the occasional huff from the wolves running alongside us, a dozen massive shadows keeping pace with effortless grace. Kian rode tucked inside my coat, his small head poking out near my collar, warm breath tickling my neck. Every few minutes he'd make a small sound, and I'd murmur reassurances I didn't quite believe myself. The mark burned. Not the searing agony from before, but a constant throbbing awareness that made every point of contact between Raiden and me feel amplified. My arms wrapped around his waist for balance. My chest pressed against his back. The heat of him seeping through layers of leather and wool, making my skin feel too tight, too sensitive. I tried to maintain distance, leaning back as far as I dared without falling off the horse. But every time I did, the mark would pulse hot enough to make me gasp, and I'd find myself pressed against him again, my body seeking proximity even as my mind rebelled. "Stop fighting it." His voice rumbled through his back and into my chest. "You're only making it worse. I wouldn't have to fight it if you'd let me ride my own horse. You can't ride. I could have learned. We don't have time for lessons." He guided the horse around a fallen tree, the movement forcing me to tighten my grip. The rebels have a 3-day head start on knowing Kian was taken. They'll have scouts searching for signs of him. The longer we're exposed, the more danger we're in. I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was settling into my bones. I'd barely slept after the mark appeared, too consumed by pain and confusion. And now, with the rhythmic sway of the horse and the unexpected warmth of Raiden's presence, my body was staging a quiet rebellion against my determination to stay alert. "Tell me about him." I nodded toward Kian, who had dozed off against my collarbone. "You called him Kian. What is he to you?" Raiden was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my brother's son, the last legitimate heir to the Patel bloodline. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "Your brother?" "Died 2 months ago. Ambush on the eastern border. His mate didn't survive the grief. She faded within a week." He said it clinically, as if reciting facts from a ledger. But I felt the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands tightened almost imperceptibly on the reins. "Kian is all that's left of them. I'm sorry. Don't be. This is the way of things. The strong survive, the weak fall." But there was something hollow in the words, like he was reciting a creed he no longer fully believed. I looked down at the sleeping pup, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. He's so small to carry that weight. He'll grow into it if he survives. Raiden glanced back at me, just a brief turn of his head. The rebels want him dead because without an heir, the bloodline ends. The northern territories would fracture into civil war. Thousands would die fighting for the throne. "And you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. "Your family, couldn't you—" "I'm a bastard. My claim is contested at best, invalid at worst. The only reason I hold the North together now is because Kian exists and I'm acting as his regent." His jaw clenched. "The moment he's gone, a dozen would-be kings will tear this land apart." I processed this in silence, watching the forest slide past. The trees were different here, taller, older, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. And between them I kept catching glimpses of movement, shadows that didn't quite match the landscape. "We're being followed." Raiden didn't seem surprised. "Since midday, they're keeping their distance, trying to get a count of our numbers. They won't attack while we're moving and alert." "That's supposed to be comforting?" "No, it's supposed to be realistic." He guided the horse down a slope, and I felt the muscles of his back shift beneath my hands. "When we make camp tonight, stay close to me. The mark will help mask your scent, make it harder for them to pinpoint you specifically. But if they get close enough, they'll know." I finished, my stomach sinking. "They'll know about the bond." "Yes. So what do we do?" For the first time since we'd left, something almost like humor touched his voice. "We pray they're smart enough to leave us alone, and we prepare for them not to be." The sun was setting when we finally stopped, painting the snow in shades of amber and blood. Raiden's wolves had already scouted the area, forming a loose perimeter around the small clearing he'd chosen. It was sheltered on 3 sides by rock formations, with only one clear approach. Tactical, I realized. Defensible. I slid off the horse with shaking legs, nearly collapsing before Raiden's hand shot out to steady me. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm, and we both jerked back as if burned. "Sorry," I muttered. He didn't respond, already moving to unsaddle the horse with practiced efficiency. I set about making myself useful, gathering what deadfall I could find for a fire while Kian tumbled through the snow, suddenly energized after sleeping all day. He pounced on shadows and wrestled with pine cones, his playfulness at odds with the tension thrumming through the camp. I found myself smiling despite everything, watching him shake snow from his fur with puppyish indignation. "He likes you." Raiden appeared beside me, his approach silent as falling snow. "He shouldn't. Patel wolves don't trust easily, especially not outsiders. Maybe he knows I saved his life. Maybe? But Raiden's gaze lingered on the pup with something almost like longing. Or maybe he knows something we don't. The fire crackled between us as darkness fell completely. The wolves maintained their watch in shifts, golden eyes glowing at intervals around our camp. Raiden had given me dried meat and hard bread, trail rations that tasted like salted leather but filled the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. Kian had finally exhausted himself, curling into a tight ball against my side. I stroked his soft fur absently, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "He needs a name," I said quietly. "Kian feels too formal, too heavy for something so small." Raiden looked up from sharpening his blade. "He has a name. He needs one that's his, something that means he gets to be a child before he's a king." I thought about it, watching the firelight dance across Kian's dark fur, the way the flames caught the frost crystals still clinging to his coat. Frost. I'll call him Frost. That's... Raiden stopped himself, jaw working. Then, softer, "He'd like that. My brother always said names should be earned, not inherited." It was the first real thing he'd shared, the first crack in his armor. I wanted to push, to ask more, but exhaustion was winning. My eyes kept drifting closed, my head nodding forward. "Sleep." Raiden's command was gentler than before. "I'll keep watch." "The mark will be fine for a few hours. You're no good to anyone if you collapse." I wanted to argue, but my body had other ideas. I shifted down, curling on my side with Frost tucked against my chest, my coat draped over both of us. The last thing I registered was the warmth of the fire and the solid presence of Raiden nearby, a sentinel against the dark. I didn't see the way he watched me as sleep claimed me. Didn't see how his expression softened as he studied the picture we made, woman and wolf pup, curled together like we'd been made to fit. Didn't see him reach out, hand hovering inches from my hair before he caught himself and pulled back. But I felt it in my dreams. Felt the mark pulse with something that wasn't quite pain. Felt something shift between us, inevitable as the coming dawn. The fortress appeared through the morning mist like something carved from a nightmare. Black stone towers clawed at the pale sky, their surfaces smooth and gleaming as if the mountain itself had been melted and reformed into something deliberately menacing. The obsidian caught the weak sunlight and threw it back in fragments, making the entire structure seem to shift and breathe. I'd thought my cabin was isolated. But this was isolation weaponized. The fortress sat atop a cliff face that dropped into nothing, surrounded by peaks that made approach from any direction except the single winding road nearly impossible. It was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, perfect for its purpose and utterly unforgiving. Frost whimpered against my chest, sensing my tension. I stroked his ears, trying to calm him, even as my own heart hammered against my ribs. "Welcome home." Raiden's voice carried no warmth, and I realized he wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to the pup, to the heir who would one day rule this cold, magnificent prison. The gates opened without anyone visible touching them. Magic, I realized, thrumming through the stone itself. We rode through into a courtyard that could have held my entire village twice over, and waiting for us, arranged in perfect formation like pieces on a game board, were the wolves. Not the warriors who'd traveled with us. These were different. They wore their human forms draped in furs and leather and silk, their clothing speaking of wealth and position. Courtiers, advisors, the machinery that kept a kingdom running. And every single one of them had golden eyes fixed on me, with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed contempt. Raiden dismounted in one fluid motion, then turned to help me down. The moment his hands touched my waist, the mark flared hot enough to make me gasp. Several of the courtiers' eyes widened, their sharp hearing no doubt catching the sound. My lord. An older woman stepped forward, her silver hair braided into an intricate crown. Her gaze raked over me like I was something she'd found stuck to her boot. You return with the heir. We are grateful. But perhaps you might explain, Lady Marin. Raiden's tone could have frozen the sun. Prepare the east wing. Our guest will require quarters. Guest? Another voice, male this time, younger. A man with the same sharp features as Raiden, but lacking his raw presence, stepped forward. Brother, surely you don't mean to install a human in the royal wing. She bears the mark, Cassian. Raiden's hand moved to my shoulder, and even through my coat I felt the answering pulse of the rune. Which makes her bondmate to the Patel line. She stays. The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched comprehension dawn across face after face, watched shock morph into calculation, into poorly hidden disgust. A human. They were looking at me like I was a human who'd somehow tricked their way into something sacred. That's impossible. Lady Marin's voice had gone very quiet. The mark doesn't choose humans. It never has. And yet, Raiden released me, and I immediately felt the absence of his touch like a physical ache. Avianna Lee saved the heir when our entire force couldn't find him. The mark appeared the moment she made contact. The bond is genuine. Or it's blood magic. Cassian's golden eyes narrowed on me. How convenient that a lone woman just happened to find the one thing we've been searching for. That the mark appeared so easily. The mark tried to kill us both when I tested it. Raiden cut him off. Blood magic doesn't cause that kind of recoil. She's bonded whether we like it or not. Whether we like it or not. The words shouldn't have stung, but they did. I wrapped my arms around Frost, who'd started growling softly at the hostile crowd. Show them. It was barely a whisper from someone in the back, but in the tense silence it carried. Show us the mark. Prove it's real. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Raiden was already moving. He shrugged off his coat in one smooth motion, then pulled his shirt over his head, baring his back to the assembly. There, blazing across his shoulder blade in intricate lines of orange and gold, was the mark. It pulsed with light, beautiful and undeniable. Then he turned to me, expectant. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to keep this private violation hidden. But I could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment. And underneath it all, the mark itself seemed to be urging me forward, wanting to be seen. With shaking hands, I pulled down the collar of my dress, exposing my shoulder. The mark answered Raiden's, light calling to light, the two runes seeming to reach for each other across the space between us. Someone gasped. Several others stepped back as if the sight physically repelled them. Satisfied? Raiden's voice was cold steel. Lady Marin recovered first, her expression settling into something professionally neutral. Of course, my lord. Forgive our surprise. We will prepare quarters immediately. But her eyes, when they met mine, held nothing but ice. The next hours passed in a blur of stone corridors and suspicious glances. I was given a suite of rooms that would have housed 20 people comfortably, all dark wood and furs, and a bed large enough to get lost in. Servants came and went, bringing hot water and fresh clothes and food I couldn't bring myself to eat. They didn't speak to me, didn't even look at me if they could help it. Frost stayed glued to my side, his presence the only warm thing in this cold palace. I tried to settle in, tried to tell myself this was temporary, that surely Raiden would find a way to break the bond and send me home. But as the afternoon wore into evening, something changed. A dull ache started at the base of my skull, spreading down my neck to settle in my shoulder where the mark lived. I tried to ignore it, but it grew steadily worse, a throbbing pain that made my vision blur. A knock at the door made me jump. One of the servants, a young woman with kind eyes who'd at least smiled at Frost, entered with an armful of fabric. "The gathering," she said quietly. "Tonight. The Lord requires your presence." "Gathering?" "To present the heir's return. Everyone of importance will be there." She laid out the dress, deep blue silk that shimmered like water, cut in the northern style with a high neck and long sleeves. "You'll need to dress appropriately." The ache in my head intensified, and I pressed my palm to my temple. "I don't think the bond." The servant's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You're too far from him. The mark is pulling you together. You need to be near the king, or the pain will only get worse." Of course it would, because nothing about this nightmare could be simple. An hour later, I stood at the entrance to the great hall, my heart in my throat, and Frost a warm weight in my arms. The dress fit perfectly, despite no one taking measurements. More magic, probably. The high collar hid most of the mark, but I could feel it pulsing beneath the fabric, a living brand. The doors opened, and sound washed over me. Hundreds of wolves in human form filled the hall, their voices creating a cacophony that made my head spin. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their light reflecting off more obsidian walls. At the far end, raised on a dais, sat a throne carved from a single piece of black stone. And standing beside it, looking every inch the Storm King in, silver and black, was Raiden. Our eyes met across the distance, and the mark flared so bright I felt it through the dress. Every head turned, every conversation died. I stood frozen as hundreds of golden eyes fixed on me, on the light bleeding through silk, impossible to hide or deny. The mark blazed brighter, responding to Raiden's presence after hours of separation, and I realized with sinking horror that everyone could see it, could see the bond declaring itself in front of the entire court. Raiden moved first, descending from the dais with predatory grace. The crowd parted before him like water, and then he was standing in front of me, close enough that the mark's pain immediately began to ease. "You're hurting." It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," I lied. His hand came up to my face, and I realized with shock that he was going to touch me. Here, in front of everyone. But instead his fingers stopped just short of my cheek, hovering in the space between us. "The bond is cruel when denied," he said quietly, for my ears only. "I should have warned you." Then, louder, addressing the room, "The heir has returned, and with him, the one chosen by the mark itself to stand as guardian to the Patel line. Any who question her place questions the magic that has kept us strong for 1,000 years." It was a challenge and a protection rolled into one. I watched the court process his words, watched calculation replace contempt on some faces, while others only looked more determined in their hostility. This was my new reality. A court that despised me, a bond I didn't choose, and a king who looked at me like I was both his salvation and his doom. The mark pulsed one more time, bright enough that even those in the back of the hall could see it. And in that moment, I knew there would be no going home. This frozen fortress, with its obsidian walls and golden-eyed wolves, was my home now, whether I wanted it or not. The attack came 3 nights after the gathering, when the fortress had finally stopped holding its breath around me. I'd settled into an uneasy routine, spending my days with Frost in the nursery wing, avoiding the courtiers who looked at me like I was a disease, and my nights counting the hours until I could justify seeking out Ryden's presence to ease the Mark's constant ache. The bond was a leash I couldn't escape, tightening whenever we were apart, loosening into something almost bearable when we were near each other. Tonight, I'd stayed in the nursery longer than usual. Frost had been restless, pacing the ornate room with its carved toys and soft rugs, whining at shadows only he could see. I'd tried to calm him with stories and gentle touches, but nothing worked. He kept returning to the window, small paws on the sill, staring out at the darkness beyond. "What is it?" I murmured, joining him. "What do you sense out there?" The fortress looked peaceful from this height. Torches burned along the walls, and I could see the regular patrols of guards making their rounds. Everything appeared normal, safe. That should have been my first warning. I was carrying Frost back to his bed when the scent hit me. Something sweet and cloying that didn't belong in the clean mountain air. My head swam, and I stumbled, catching myself against the doorframe. Frost yelped, struggling in my arms. The guards posted outside the nursery were slumped against the wall, their eyes closed, chests rising and falling in the slow rhythm of drugged sleep. My blood went cold. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped Frost. He was growling now, that tiny puppy sound that would have been adorable if it wasn't accompanied by real fear in his golden eyes. "It's okay," I whispered, setting him down and dragging a heavy chest in front of the door. "It's going to be okay. Raiden will come. He'll know something's wrong." But Raiden was in the war room, 3 floors below, and on the opposite side of the fortress. The bond pulled at me, a constant awareness of his location, and I knew with sickening certainty that he was too far away. By the time he felt my distress through the mark, it would be too late. Something hit the door. Once, twice. The wood splintered on the third impact, the bolt holding but the frame beginning to crack. Frost positioned himself between me and the door, his small body rigid with determination. "Good boy," I breathed, looking around frantically for a weapon. The nursery was full of soft things, safe things. Nothing sharp, nothing useful. "Come on, think." The door exploded inward, and they came through in a rush of leather and steel, and golden eyes gone cold with purpose. 3 of them, moving with the fluid grace of trained killers. I recognized one. A young man from the gathering, one of Cassian's friends who'd sneered when the mark blazed through my dress. "Just give us the pup," he said, drawing a blade that gleamed red in the firelight. "Poisoned," some distant part of my mind noted. "You don't have to die here, human. Walk away." "No." The word came out steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Brave." Another one circled to my left, trying to flank me. "But stupid. You're not one of us. You can't protect him." Frost snarled, and the sound was answered by something in my chest. A heat that had nothing to do with fear. The mark on my shoulder suddenly burned hotter than it ever had. Even hotter than the first moment it appeared. I gasped, pressing my hand to it, and felt something shift beneath my palm. The traitor lunged for Frost. I moved without thinking, throwing myself between them, and the mark erupted. Orange flame roared to life along my arm, racing from shoulder to fingertips in a cascade of fire that didn't burn me but blazed hot enough to make the air shimmer. The traitor screamed, stumbling back as the flames licked at his face. The scent of singed fur filled the room. I stared at my arm in shock. The fire wasn't separate from me. It was me. flowing from the mark like it had been waiting for this moment. The rune blazed so bright I could see it through my dress, pulsing in time with my racing heart. "Blood magic," one of them hissed. "She's using." "It's not blood magic." The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere primal. "It's the mark, and you just threatened what it's sworn to protect." They attacked together this time, coordinated and desperate, but the fire responded to my will, forming a barrier between them and Frost. When one tried to dart past, the flames surged forward, forcing him back with a wall of heat. Another threw a knife. I raised my burning arm instinctively, and the blade melted before it could reach me. Droplets of molten metal hissing against the stone floor. But I was tiring. Whatever power fueled the flames was draining me fast, and they knew it. I could see the calculation in their eyes as they regrouped, waiting for the moment when I'd falter. And I would falter. I was human, mortal, and they were wolves who could fight for hours without breaking. "Just a little longer," I whispered to Frost, who pressed against my legs. "He's coming. I know he's coming." The leader fainted left, and when I moved to block, the other two split, one going high, one low. I couldn't cover both angles, couldn't protect Frost and myself. The fire sputtered as my concentration fractured. Then the world exploded. Raiden came through the wall, not the door, the actual stone wall, in his wolf form, obsidian and silver and fury given shape. He was massive, easily twice the size of the traitors, and the sound he made was something beyond a growl. It was rage and violence and absolute authority. The traitors tried to shift, to meet him on equal ground, but Raiden was already on them. I turned away, pulling Frost against my chest and covering his eyes as sounds I'd never forget filled the nursery. Snarls, screams, the wet sound of flesh tearing. When silence finally fell, I dared to look. Raiden stood in human form again, blood splattered across his bare chest and face, his eyes still more wolf than man. The traitors weren't moving, wouldn't ever move again. And standing in the doorway were a dozen guards, their faces pale with shock as they took in the scene. Then Raiden's gaze found me, and everything else ceased to exist. He crossed the ruined nursery in 3 strides, his hands coming up to frame my face, checking for injuries with a gentleness that contrasted violently with what I'd just witnessed. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "I'm fine. Frost is fine." My voice sounded strange, distant. The fire had gone out the moment he arrived, but my arm still tingled with residual heat. "How did you know?" "The mark." His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I realized I was shaking. "I felt your fear through it. Felt the moment you called the flames." His eyes dropped to my arm, where the rune still glowed faintly. "You manifested the mark's power. That shouldn't be possible. You're not wolf." I finished numbly. "I know." "Not trained," he corrected, and something like wonder crept into his expression. "The mark chose you to protect the heir, and you held 3 trained assassins at bay until I could reach you." His forehead dropped to rest against mine, and I felt him shudder. "You could have died. So could Frost. Damn the pup." The words were harsh, but his touch remained gentle. "You could have died." I pulled back enough to meet his eyes, seeing something there I hadn't before, something raw and unguarded. But I didn't. The mark, it protected us both. Around us, guards were securing the room, removing bodies, checking for other threats. Cassian appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he took in his brother covered in blood, and me still standing with flames flickering faintly around my fingertips. "The drugged wine," he said quietly. "It was meant for the night watch. We found the source, one of the kitchen staff. She's confessed to 3 others in the conspiracy. Execute them all." Raiden's voice was flat, emotionless. "Publicly, at dawn. I want every wolf in this fortress to understand what happens when they threaten the heir." "And the human?" Lady Marin had appeared behind Cassian, her expression unreadable as she looked at me. "She wielded fire, my lord, the sacred flame of the mark itself. This changes things." "Yes." Raiden's arm came around my waist, pulling me against his side. The mark sang at the contact, warm and right. "It does. Avianna Lee isn't just bondmate to the Patel line. She's its guardian, its protector, and anyone who doubts that can take it up with me." The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. I felt dozens of eyes on us. Guards, courtiers, the wolves who doubted and scorned me. But all I could focus on was Frost, safe in my arms, and the man beside me who had torn through a wall to reach us. The mark pulsed once more, and this time the burn felt different. It felt like acceptance, like coming home. Dawn came cold and merciless, painting the execution platform in shades of blood and ice. I stood on the balcony outside Raiden's chambers. My chambers now, he'd insisted after the attack, with Frost warm against my chest and the mark a constant presence on my shoulder. Below, the entire fortress had gathered in the courtyard. A sea of golden eyes turned upward to watch their king dispense justice. Raiden stood on the platform in full royal regalia, the silver and black of the Patel line making him look carved from the same obsidian as his fortress. 4 traitors knelt before him, including the young man who'd tried to kill Frost, the kitchen worker who'd drugged the wine, 2 others who'd helped plan the attack. I'd never watched an execution before, had never wanted to, but Raiden had asked me to be present, and something in his voice made it clear this wasn't just about justice. It was about sending a message. These wolves betrayed the heir. Raiden's voice carried across the courtyard without him having to shout, pure authority making every word resonate. Betrayed the bloodline, betrayed the North itself. The penalty is death, and the method is mine to choose. He shifted then, the transformation so smooth it looked like water flowing upward. The massive silver wolf stood where the man had been, and even from this distance I could feel the power radiating from him. This was the Storm King in his true form, ancient, terrible, beautiful. It was over quickly. Raiden didn't draw it out or make a spectacle of their suffering. One by one, swift and final. When he shifted back to human form, blood stained his hands and mouth, and he didn't bother wiping it away. "Let this be understood," he said into the heavy silence. "The heir is protected by the mark itself, by magic older than any of us, and anyone who threatens what the mark has claimed will face me." His eyes swept the crowd, and I felt the weight of his gaze even from here. "This includes my mate. Avianna Lee stands under my protection, now and always. Question her at your peril." The crowd dispersed slowly, wolves murmuring among themselves. Some looked chastened, others merely calculating, already planning their next move. But the message was clear. I wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Frost. I heard the door to the chambers open behind me, felt Raiden's presence before he spoke. "You didn't have to watch." "Yes, I did." I turned to face him. He'd cleaned the blood away but hadn't changed the clothes, still wearing the formal attire that made him look like something out of a legend. "They came for Frost because of me. Because the mark chose someone they see as weak. They came for Frost because they're power-hungry fools who thought a child would be easier to kill than a wolf in his prime." He moved closer, and the mark hummed its approval. "And they learned differently. Because you saved us." "No." His hand came up to brush a strand of hair from my face, the gesture so gentle it made my throat tight. I arrived in time to finish what you'd already started. You held them off, Avianna. You called fire from the mark and protected the heir when trained warriors couldn't. That's not weakness. I wanted to argue, to point out that I'd been terrified, that the flames had been instinct rather than skill. But the way he was looking at me made the words die on my lips. "Let me see your arm," he said quietly. I'd almost forgotten about the burns. The fire hadn't hurt me while it blazed, but afterward, once the adrenaline faded, I discovered angry red marks where the flames had been hottest. Nothing serious, but enough to ache. Ryden's jaw clenched when I rolled up my sleeve, exposing the burns that traced the same pattern as the mark. You pushed too hard, drew too much power too fast. I didn't know what I was doing. I know, which makes it even more remarkable that you survived. He guided me inside, to the sitting area where a healer's kit waited. Someone must have brought it while we were on the balcony. "Sit." I obeyed, settling into the chair with frost curling at my feet. Raiden knelt before me, the Storm King on his knees, and began treating the burns with a salve that smelled of mountain herbs and something sweeter. His touch was careful, reverent almost, each movement deliberate. "I was wrong about you," he said after a long silence. "That first day, when I saw you in that cabin with my mark on your shoulder, I thought it was a mistake. Thought the magic had chosen wrong, picked someone too fragile for this world. Most people still think that. Most people are idiots." His thumb traced the edge of a burn, feather-light. "You're not fragile, Avianna. You're steel wrapped in silk. You survived 3 years alone in the northern wastes. You saved Frost when an entire army couldn't find him. You stood against trained killers and held the line." He looked up, meeting my eyes. "You're exactly what the mark knew we needed. What I needed, even if I was too blind to see it." The mark pulsed between us, and I realized something had changed. The constant ache, the burning pull that had plagued me since the bond formed, it was fading. Not disappearing, but transforming into something else, something warm and right. "It's settling," Raiden murmured, his hand moving to his own shoulder where the rune blazed. The mark. It was fighting us because we were fighting it. But now we're not. I reached out, touching his mark for the first time voluntarily. The contact sent sparks racing up my arm, but it wasn't pain, it was connection, pure and undeniable. Ryden's breath caught. "Avianna, I'm not your prisoner anymore." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "So, what am I?" He stood slowly, pulling me up with him until we were face to face, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "You're my mate, my equal, the guardian of my bloodline and the one the magic chose to stand beside me." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone. "And if you'll have me, if you can forgive how I treated you, you're my queen." The mark flared brilliant gold, no longer orange and burning, but warm and steady. I looked down at my shoulder and saw it had changed. The angry red rune had settled into something beautiful, like liquid gold inked permanently into my skin. When I glanced at Raiden's, I saw his had transformed to match. "No more pain?" I whispered. "No more pain." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. "Just this, just us." I should probably say no. I closed my eyes, breathing him in, winter wind and pine and something uniquely him. I didn't ask for this, didn't want this life. I know. I'm terrified of your court, of this world I don't understand. I know. And you're arrogant and cold and you kick down my door. I know." His lips quirked into something almost like a smile. But Frost needs me, needs us both." I opened my eyes, and the mark chose me for a reason. Maybe I need to trust that. Is that a yes? I thought about my cabin in the wastes, about the solitary life I'd lived for so long. Then I thought about Frost's small body pressed against mine, about the way Raiden had torn through a wall to reach us, about fire blooming from my skin to protect what was mine. "It's a yes." I said it firmly without hesitation. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I won't be decorative. I want to learn to use the mark's power properly, want to train to understand this world I'm now part of." "Done. And you have to actually talk to me, not just give orders and expect me to follow. We're equals, remember?" "Done." His smile widened, and I realized it was the first real smile I'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less like the Storm King and more like the man beneath the crown. "Anything else?" "Frost stays with us, always. I wouldn't have it any other way." He glanced down at the pup, who'd climbed into my chair and was watching us with knowing, golden eyes. "He's pack now. Our pack." Raiden kissed me then, slow and deep and claiming. The mark sang between us, no longer a brand but a bond, tying us together in ways that transcended magic or duty. When we finally broke apart, he kept me close, his arms wrapped around my waist. "Come," he murmured against my hair. "I want to show you something." He led me to the balcony, to the place where I'd watched dawn break over the execution. But now the sun was higher, burning off the morning mist, and I could see the full scope of the northern territories stretching out below us. Mountains and forests and frozen rivers, all of it harsh and beautiful and unforgiving, and falling softly from the sky, the first snow of winter. I held out my hand, watching flakes melt against my palm. Frost pressed between us, his small body warm and safe. Raiden's arms came around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder where the mark glowed gentle gold. "This is home now," he said quietly. "These mountains, this fortress. Me? Is it enough?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I turned in his arms and kissed him again, tasting winter and promise and the future we'd build together. "It's enough," I whispered. "It's everything." The mark pulsed once more, content and settled, and through our bond I felt what Raiden felt, not just desire or duty, but something deeper, something that felt like love trying to take root in frozen ground. The snow kept falling, soft and relentless, but I wasn't cold anymore. I was home. If Avianna and Raiden's journey from frozen enemies to fated mates captured your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Did the moment when Avianna's mark burst into flames give you chills? Did you feel the tension when Raiden first crashed through her cabin door? What happens next? While this chapter closes, their story is far from over. The Northern Court still holds secrets. Frost is growing into his power, and Avianna must learn to wield the mark's fire. Would you like to see more of their journey? Let me know. Which moment was your favorite? What would you like to see in future chapters? Should we explore the deeper mysteries of the Patel bloodline? Drop a comment below or reach out. Your feedback fuels the next story. And if you loved this tale of ice, fire, and fated bonds, share it with someone who needs a little magic in their life. The North is waiting. The mark has chosen, and the story has only just begun.